What would happen if the smallest act of kindness you ever showed someone came back to change your entire life years later? Imagine a freezing winter night. A young boy with almost nothing to his name gives away the only blanket keeping him warm. The stranger he helps is a homeless veteran. The boy never sees him again, or so he thinks. 15 years later, an unexpected knock on his door reveals a secret that will leave him speechless. Stay with me until the end, because this true-to-life story proves that kindness never disappears. It travels through time and returns when you least expect it. In a small town where winter winds seemed to cut through every crack in every building, there lived a young boy named Ethan. He was only 10 years old, but life had already taught him lessons that many adults spend decades trying to understand. While other children his age worried about toys, video games, and weekend adventures, Ethan worried about whether there would be enough food on the table when he came home from school. His family lived in a tiny apartment on the edge of town. The walls were old, the roof leaked when it rained, and the heating system barely worked during the coldest months of the year. Yet despite the hardships surrounding him, there was something remarkable about Ethan that set him apart from everyone else. He had a heart that seemed far bigger than his circumstances. Every morning before school, Ethan would help his mother with chores. He understood that every small contribution mattered. His mother worked long hours at multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Money was always tight, and there were many things the family simply could not afford. Ethan never complained. Instead, he watched his mother struggle and learned the value of gratitude. He learned that even when life feels unfair, there is always a choice between bitterness and kindness. While many people become hardened by hardship, Ethan became softer. The less he had, the more he appreciated what little he possessed. One afternoon after school, Ethan noticed a classmate sitting alone during lunch. The boy had forgotten his lunch at home and was pretending not to be hungry. Without hesitation, Ethan split his own small meal in half. It wasn't much. In fact, it barely filled his own stomach. Yet he handed over half of it with a smile. His friend looked surprised and asked why he would give away food when he clearly needed it himself. Ethan simply shrugged and replied, "Because being hungry together feels better than watching someone else go hungry alone." Those simple words revealed something extraordinary about his character. As the weeks passed, stories of Ethan's kindness continued to appear. He helped elderly neighbors carry groceries. He spent time talking to people others ignored. He offered encouragement to classmates who felt left out. He never expected praise or recognition. In fact, most of the time no one noticed what he was doing. But Ethan didn't help people because he wanted attention. He helped because he understood what it felt like to struggle. He knew how painful it was to feel invisible, and he never wanted anyone else to experience that loneliness. The arrival of winter brought new challenges. Temperatures dropped lower each day, and icy winds swept through the streets. Families with money turned up their heaters and wrapped themselves in warm blankets. For Ethan's family, staying warm was much more difficult. They had to conserve every dollar. Some nights Ethan could see his breath inside the apartment. He owned only one thick blanket, a faded blue blanket that had been given to him years earlier. It wasn't new or beautiful, but it was precious. During freezing nights, it was the only thing that kept him warm enough to sleep comfortably. He treasured it because he knew replacing it would be nearly impossible. Yet even as winter tightened its grip on the town, Ethan's concern was never focused entirely on himself. Walking home from school each day, he noticed people who seemed to be struggling even more than his family. He saw tired faces, worried expressions, and individuals carrying burdens no one else seemed to notice. While others hurried past, Ethan paid attention. He wondered about their stories. He wondered what challenges they faced when no one was watching. Deep inside, he believed that every person mattered, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. What Ethan didn't know was that his compassionate heart was about to place him in a situation that would test everything he believed. A single encounter on a freezing winter evening would force him to make a decision that most adults would find difficult. It would require sacrifice, courage, and a level of selflessness that few people ever demonstrate. At only 10 years old, Ethan was about to prove that true wealth is not measured by what we own, but by what we are willing to give. The winter of that year was unlike anything Ethan had experienced before. Each day seemed colder than the last, and the town was trapped beneath a blanket of gray skies and icy winds. People hurried from place to place with their coats zipped tightly, their hands buried in pockets, and their heads lowered against the freezing air. For most families, winter was uncomfortable. For families like Ethan's, it was a daily struggle. Every night, he wrapped himself in his old blue blanket and listened to the wind whistle through the cracks in the apartment walls. It was the one possession he valued more than anything else, because it provided warmth when there was very little of it to be found. One evening, Ethan stayed late after school to help clean up after a community event. By the time he started walking home, darkness had already settled over the streets. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and every breath formed small clouds in front of his face. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around his body and quickened his pace. All he could think about was getting home, eating dinner, and curling up beneath his blanket to escape the bitter cold. As he walked through the downtown area, he noticed that the streets were unusually quiet. Most people had already rushed indoors. The stores were closing, and only a few cars moved through the frozen roads. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted someone sitting alone near the entrance of an old building. At first, he almost walked past without looking. But something made him stop. The figure was an older man wrapped in worn-out clothes that clearly offered little protection from the weather. His coat was torn. His shoes were damaged. His hands were red from the cold. Beside him sat a small backpack that appeared to contain everything he owned. The man's shoulders trembled slightly as he tried to shield himself from the freezing wind. Ethan could tell immediately that he was homeless. For a moment, Ethan stood there watching. Most people who passed by either ignored the man completely or glanced at him before quickly looking away. It was as if he had become invisible. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. He remembered all the times he had seen people struggle and how lonely it must feel when nobody cares enough to stop. Gathering his courage, Ethan slowly approached the man. "Sir, are you okay?" he asked softly. The man looked up, surprised that anyone had spoken to him. His face was weathered with age and hardship. There was exhaustion in his eyes, but there was also kindness. He managed a small smile and nodded. "I've been through worse," he replied. As they talked, Ethan learned that the man was a military veteran. Years earlier, he had served his country proudly. He had sacrificed so much during his service, but after returning home, life had become difficult. A series of unfortunate events had left him without a home, without family nearby, and without anyone to depend on. Now he spent his nights wherever he could find shelter. The more Ethan listened, the heavier his heart became. He couldn't stop staring at the man's trembling hands. The cold was becoming unbearable. Even Ethan was struggling to stay warm, and he knew he would soon be heading back to his apartment. But this veteran had nowhere to go. Then Ethan thought about his blue blanket waiting for him at home. Immediately, a battle began inside his mind. That blanket was all he had. Without it, sleeping through the winter nights would be miserable. He would be cold. He would be uncomfortable. His mother could not afford another one. Giving it away would mean sacrificing the only thing that protected him from the freezing temperatures. For several moments, he wrestled with the decision. Every practical reason told him to keep it. Nobody would blame him if he did. After all, he was just a child. Yet every time he looked at the veteran, he felt a voice inside him whispering that the man needed it more. When Ethan finally arrived home, he couldn't stop thinking about the veteran sitting alone in the cold. He ate dinner quietly. He tried to focus on other things. But the image of the shivering man refused to leave his mind. A few minutes later he walked into his room, picked up the blue blanket from his bed, folded it carefully, and held it tightly against his chest. Ignoring the cold outside, Ethan rushed back through the dark streets toward the place where he had seen the veteran. His heart pounded with every step. When he arrived, the man was still there, trying to stay warm against the relentless wind. Without saying much, Ethan walked over and placed the blanket into the veteran's hands. The man looked down at it in disbelief. "Son, I can't take this," he said. Ethan smiled gently. "You need it more than I do." The veteran stared at the blanket, then back at the young boy standing before him. His eyes began to fill with tears. In all his years, after everything he had endured, he could hardly believe that a child with so little would be willing to give away something so valuable. The blanket itself was simple, but the sacrifice behind it meant everything. The morning after Ethan gave away his only blanket, he woke up shivering. The cold seemed to fill every corner of his small bedroom. Throughout the night, he had wrapped himself in extra clothes, trying to stay warm, but it wasn't enough. Yet despite the discomfort, he felt something strange inside him. There was no regret, no bitterness, no feeling that he had made a mistake. Instead, there was a quiet sense of peace. Knowing that someone else had been protected from the freezing cold made his own sacrifice feel worthwhile. Life, however, did not suddenly become easier because of his kindness. If anything, the years that followed brought new challenges. Ethan continued growing up in difficult circumstances. His family struggled financially, and there were many days when it seemed as though every step forward was followed by 2 steps backward. His mother worked tirelessly, often returning home exhausted from long shifts. Ethan helped whenever he could, taking on odd jobs around the neighborhood to earn a little extra money. He mowed lawns, delivered newspapers, cleaned garages, and carried groceries for elderly residents. Every dollar mattered. As time passed, Ethan became a teenager. The innocence of childhood slowly gave way to the realities of adulthood. He watched friends from wealthier families pursue opportunities that felt out of reach for him. While some of his classmates focused on vacations, hobbies, and entertainment, Ethan focused on survival and responsibility. He learned to work hard because he had no other choice. There were moments when life felt unfair. Moments when he questioned why some people seemed to receive endless opportunities while others had to fight for every small success. There were nights when he lay awake worrying about the future. Would he ever escape poverty? Would all his effort eventually amount to something? The answers never came easily. The memory of the homeless veteran remained with him for a while. Occasionally, he wondered what had happened to the man. He hoped the blanket had helped him through that difficult winter. He hoped life had somehow improved for him. But as months turned into years, the memory slowly faded into the background of Ethan's life. Not because it wasn't important, but because life kept demanding his attention elsewhere. By the time Ethan reached his 20s, he had become a hardworking young man with big dreams and limited resources. After graduating, he found employment at a small construction company. The work was physically demanding, and the pay wasn't remarkable, but he was grateful for the opportunity. Every morning before sunrise, he headed to work determined to build a better future. Yet challenges continued to appear. The company experienced financial difficulties. Some months there was plenty of work, while other months employees worried about layoffs. Ethan often found himself juggling bills, managing expenses, and wondering how he would make everything work. Despite his efforts, success never seemed to arrive as quickly as he had hoped. What made the situation even harder was watching others succeed while he struggled. Friends launched businesses, bought homes, and started families. Ethan was genuinely happy for them. But there were moments when he couldn't help feeling discouraged. He worked just as hard, yet progress seemed painfully slow. Still, one thing about Ethan never changed. His kindness remained intact. Even when money was tight, he found ways to help others. He volunteered at community events. He donated small amounts whenever he could. He treated people with respect regardless of their circumstances. Many people become cynical after years of disappointment. But Ethan refused to allow hardship to steal his compassion. As 15 years passed, the story of the blue blanket became little more than a distant memory. The veteran's face had grown blurry in Ethan's mind. The details of that freezing winter evening were becoming harder to recall. If someone had asked him about the most important moment of his childhood, he might not even have mentioned it. To him, it had simply been the right thing to do. What Ethan didn't realize was that while he had nearly forgotten that night, someone else remembered every detail. Someone had carried the memory of that simple act of kindness through every passing year. Someone had never forgotten the young boy who gave away his only blanket when he had every reason to keep it. And while Ethan focused on building his future, an incredible chain of events had quietly been unfolding behind the scenes, moving closer and closer toward a moment neither of them could have imagined. Everything. 15 years had passed since that freezing winter night. Ethan was no longer the small boy who had walked through icy streets carrying a worn blue blanket. He was now a grown man in his mid-20s, working long hours and doing everything possible to build a stable future. Life had taught him resilience, patience, and perseverance. Although he never gave up, there were days when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. Success seemed to remain just beyond his reach. He continued moving forward one step at a time, hoping that someday his hard work would pay off. One rainy evening, Ethan returned home after another exhausting day at work. The sky was dark, and the steady sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the small apartment he rented. He dropped his keys onto the kitchen counter, loosened his work boots, and sat down at the table. His body ached from the day's labor. Like many evenings before, he began reviewing bills, calculating expenses, and trying to figure out how he would stretch his paycheck through the rest of the month. The pressure was becoming difficult to ignore. Rising costs, unexpected repairs, and financial responsibilities seemed to appear faster than opportunities. Ethan stared at the stack of papers in front of him and wondered whether life would ever become easier. He had spent years doing the right thing, working honestly, and treating people with kindness, yet it often felt as though he was running a race with no finish line. Then, just as he was about to put the papers away, he heard a knock at the door. At first he ignored it. He wasn't expecting visitors. Most of his friends usually called before stopping by. The knock came again, louder this time. Curious, Ethan stood up and walked toward the entrance. Through the small peephole, he could see a figure standing outside beneath the porch light. Opening the door, he found himself face to face with a man he had never seen before. The stranger appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He was dressed in an elegant suit and carried himself with confidence. His appearance suggested success and professionalism. Parked in front of the building was an expensive black vehicle that clearly belonged to him. Everything about the man seemed polished and respectable. Ethan immediately assumed there had been some mistake. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. The stranger studied Ethan's face carefully for several seconds. There was a strange emotion in his eyes, as though he had been searching for something for a very long time and had finally found it. "Are you Ethan Parker?" the man asked. Ethan nodded cautiously. The stranger smiled softly. Then I've been looking for you for nearly 15 years. Ethan frowned in confusion. The statement made no sense. He searched his memory but couldn't recognize the man standing before him. He wondered if this was someone connected to work, an old neighbor, or perhaps a distant acquaintance he had forgotten. I'm sorry, Ethan replied. Do I know you? The man took a slow breath before answering, no. But someone who changed my life knew you. Those words instantly caught Ethan's attention. The stranger reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed a small object wrapped in protective cloth. As he unfolded the fabric, Ethan's eyes widened. Lying inside was a faded piece of blue material. For a moment his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The cloth looked familiar. Very familiar. The stranger held it gently, almost as if it were priceless. Does this remind you of anything? He asked. Ethan stared at it. Suddenly, memories he hadn't thought about in years came rushing back. A freezing winter evening. A homeless veteran sitting alone in the cold, a worn blue blanket, the sacrifice that had seemed so important at the time but had gradually faded into memory. His heart began to race. The veteran, Ethan whispered. The stranger nodded. Yes, the veteran. A silence filled the doorway. Ethan could hardly believe what was happening. Questions flooded his mind. How could this man know about that night? Why had he spent 15 years searching for him? What connection did he have to the veteran? Seeing Ethan's confusion, the stranger explained that he was the veteran's son. Years earlier, he had lost contact with his father during one of the most difficult periods of their lives. Circumstances, misunderstandings, and distance had separated them. For a long time, he didn't know where his father was or whether he was even alive. Then, one day everything changed. The veteran eventually managed to rebuild his life. He found shelter, received assistance, and slowly began recovering from years of hardship. During that process, he often spoke about a young boy who had restored his faith in humanity on one of the coldest nights of his life. He never forgot the blanket. He never forgot the sacrifice. He never forgot the kindness shown by a child who had almost nothing yet chose to give everything he could. According to his son, the veteran carried a small piece of that blue blanket with him everywhere he went. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that goodness still existed in the world, even when life seemed hopeless. Whenever challenges appeared, he would look at that piece of fabric and remember the young boy who had treated him with dignity when so many others had ignored him. Ethan stood frozen in disbelief as the stranger continued speaking, realizing that the simple act he had nearly forgotten had remained alive in someone else's heart every single day for the last 15 years.